Good morning, everyone, and welcome to FSMA Fridays and our November topic, what's not going to go away in the final rules and what you should be doing today to prepare. I'm Barbara Levin. I will be your host today for our FSMA Friday. Before we introduce our Atchison Group team for today, let me give you just a few housekeeping announcements. We are being hosted on this event by WebEx. If you have any technical issues, you can call WebEx Technical Support directly at 877-509-3239. For those of you that may be joining on the podcast only and can't see the slide, 877-509-3239. The recording link will be sent out to everybody via email on Monday. We will be taking questions at the end of the pre-submitted questions. If you're online, you'll be able to submit those. We'll show you how at that point in our event today. And for your privacy, you can see the names of the panelists in your name only and not the names of the other attendees. As always, we have a very simple agenda today. We're going to first present our pre-submitted questions to our panel. We're then going to take a moment to tell you how SafetyChain can help you get FSMA ready, and then we'll take the questions from the audience. We're excited, as always, to present our FSMA Fridays team from the Atchison Group. We're very excited to have Jennifer, Ann, and Valerie joining us today. So welcome. And we're going to just jump right into it with you, Jennifer. Perhaps before we get into the questions on today's topic, you can give us the latest updates from FDA on FSMA.
Sure. Well, one of the most recent things that came out of FDA was a document that gives some additional information, guidance, answers some questions around facility registration. We are in the period right now until the end of December where facilities that have registered before need to renew their registration. So this happens every 2 years in the even-numbered years in the fall. That period is open now. The reason that FDA came out with this document most recently was because, in part, some of the changes that we saw that were discussed on the past few FSMA Fridays that pertain to what's included in the definition of a farm and when might a farm actually be manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding food that would trigger facility registration. Some of those changes prompted FDA to clarify in this document who exactly needs to register. So if you're a farm out there or working with farms who wonder if they need to register, be aware that this document is available. Additionally, within the past several weeks, FDA has had their roadshow, had a couple of public meetings, and some interesting reports of the comments that have been offered orally by stakeholders. So still definitely some questions up in the air in terms of how some of these rules will be finalized, but we've got until December 15th to submit written comments. Anybody can do that. Even though there are some of these areas that are still being debated, we know that there's a whole lot that's going to stay put that we need to begin preparing for, and I know that's exactly what we're talking about today.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So with that, Ann, welcome back to FSMA Fridays. And you know, as Jennifer said, you know, people right now are craving information of, okay, it's looking close, what should I start to do? So, you know, with the second revision on some of the rules out now, maybe you can tell us how close do we think we are to the final rules? What do you think can still change? And are there certain rules that we're more confident about than others in terms of how much change we might still see coming ahead?
Sure, great questions. I would like to start with the third-party certification proposed rule. We anticipate some changes there, specifically as the requirement for auditors to have mandatory reporting to the FDA on significant issues of public health impact when they find them. And this includes consultative audits as well. And it's kind of, in my opinion, counterintuitive to, you know, why you do an audit in the first place, to, you know, continuous improvement. And we believe that mandatory reporting requirement will be removed from that rule. The second rule I'd like to talk about is food defense, and it's possible that we'll see some changes there, but I'm not really certain what they are, but my gut feel is taking a look at FDA's Carver shock tool and the way that GFSI views food defense and kind of the industry norm today on food defense, and then looking at the focus mitigation strategies that are out there in the proposed rule and maybe bridging the gap just a little bit between those two, so possibly some changes there. As for what's going to stay put, the bulk of the other 5 rules, so those 4 that have been reproposed and sanitary transport, there may be some slight changes, but for the most part, those are pretty much final. Because we're not anticipating those changes, our company, we really recommend that you really start looking at those rules intensely, really gain that understanding internally, get your project team together, make a project plan, start updating your GMP documents, make sure that, whatever gaps are there, that you're closing those, you're doing implementation, you're doing effective training, really working towards being compliant with those rules. And, our mantra is just don't wait, don't wait, don't wait. Good question.
Thank
you, Barbara.
Thank you. And so back to you, Jennifer. So if we believe that we're close to final on those other rules that Ann just mentioned, what are the top 3 things that companies should be doing now to start to prepare? What's some practical information that we can share with our attendees?
Sure. Well, I think Ann made a great point, which is get your project plan together, just make sure you understand the rules and where you might fit. In terms of what I think are some of the very specific things that companies can do right now, first, it's figuring out who that qualified individual is going to be, especially in the manufacturing facilities, those that would require adherence to preventive controls, but also foreign supplier verification. Who is your qualified individual or team of qualified individuals, and make sure that they know that they know what their responsibilities are going to be, that they begin to understand this. The second thing, I think, is really starting to give some really hard thought as to when something that you now, today, consider a prerequisite program and maybe a part of GMPs, in FDA's eyes, as preventive controls is finalized, is that going to be a preventive control and no longer just a background foundational GMP? So I think really understanding that concept of what preventive control means and how FDA views it beyond process controls, beyond CCPs, as you look at your HACCP table and it says, well, this hazard is controlled through GMPs, giving some real thought as to, is that now a preventive control because it's being controlled through GMPs? Another thing that I've seen a lot of companies struggling with right now is just how to manage these documents and these records that are going to be scrutinized, that FDAs will have access to, that you need to generate to show that you're compliant. That document management piece is another. And if I can add a fourth, if I may be permitted to go to 4, I would also say supply chain control. So understanding who's in that supply chain. Do you have an approval process? How do you demonstrate that a supplier has been approved? How are you controlling that supplier? How are you evaluating risks of that supplier? And most companies do it, but it's not necessarily through a very well-documented program, one that would stand up to the rigor of and scrutiny of FDA as they look at these rules. So that's, in terms of where to start, those are some of the things that I would recommend companies begin really delving into right now.
Great, thank you. Let's go on to question 4. And Val, welcome back to FSMA Fridays. I'm going to shoot this one over to you. Jennifer just mentioned supplier controls. FDA did make some significant changes in this last round of revision. Will these hold? And if so, what should companies be doing now to prepare for supplier control?
Well, thank you, Barbara. It's great to be back. The short answer to your first question is yes, you're going to need to have supplier control. Although it looks like a new addition as part of the supplement, it was fully expected and it's not going to go away. We all need to also remember that regulatory compliance is really the baseline of our requirement for our operations. And what we're really seeking is brand protection as our end result. So the Supplier Control program helps us to support this strategy in a very nice way. So there's two main key steps to get started. Number one, as Jennifer said, is you need to get a supplier approval process in place. You need to start thinking about the different risks of the different products that you procure, the risk of those suppliers, and make decisions on what to do to control those risks. Now, from your hazard analysis, should you identify a significant hazard, and remember that's one that would yield a serious adverse health consequence or death to humans or animals, then you're also going to be required to perform monitoring, verification, and corrective action that is associated with controlling that particular hazard. And then at step two, you need to figure out how to manage all this information, which can include the audit, the certificates of analysis, test results, product specifications, certificates of liability insurance, whatever documentation that you feel is needed to fully support your system in order to make the decision of approved versus rejected. Now, this can be a manual system. You can handle it through SharePoint or logging it into Excel spreadsheets. You can leverage technology that you already have within your business, such as adding on a new module, or you can seek a new technology opportunity to help manage the wealth of information you're going to need to collect and provide you with some peace of mind during the process. And if I may offer some practical advice to everyone out there listening today is, if you're looking for a technology solution, what you'll want to do is formulate a multidisciplinary team to understand your top non-negotiable items. This can be 3 things, 5 things, 10 things. Get those written down on a piece of paper and understand what the technology needs to do to help your business and enable you to apply your resources in such a way that it's cost effective. And then take that list of non-negotiable items to these technology providers and ask them what they can do for you in order to meet those. Hopefully this helps to answer your question, Barbara.
Great, thank you, Val. Let's move on now. Back to you, Ann, for question 5. Let's look at this from a scientific standpoint now. It sounds like companies are going to need to validate their safety processes. Will FDA be flexible in accepting tried and true operations, or will new studies need to be conducted? What's your thought on this?
Sure, this is another really good question, and right up my alley. So I'm glad I have this question. I will start with the tried and true. So I think that the FDA will accept tried and true. For example, if you're doing a cook process and you're monitoring an endpoint internal product temperature of 160 degrees, they'll probably be okay with that. Same goes for if you have a pH control in your process that's less than 4.6. These 2 things eliminate or control certain pathogens in your product that might be a risk in your facility, but make sure that you have the available published literature, the trade association data, something along those lines that's of scientific nature of what's going to be required in your food safety plan for your validations, that you have that tried and true scientific support for those process controls that you have in place today. Switching to new studies to be conducted. So if you have a product that is novel or new, or a process that's novel or new, and there isn't available scientific literature to support a particular temperature of cook, a cooling process, a pH control, something along those lines, you will want to make sure that you have that data. Does that data have to be a new study? Does it have to be, a cooling analysis against a pathogen modeling program? Reach out to a third-party expert if you need to. Talk to your qualified individual. That person is the person that needs to oversee all of this. And there's a possibility that you might have to conduct some new studies if you don't feel that your current validated process is going to meet the rigors of the expectation of the rule. And we can help you understand that if you would like us to. So please feel free to reach out. Again, really good question, and just make sure that you have scientific justification for your validations in your food safety plan.
Great.
Thanks,
well
Barbara.
Said. Thank you, Ann. Jennifer, I'm going to go back to you for the last of the pre-submitted questions. Are there any proposed rules where uncertainty still exists that should stop people from preparing? And second, do you expect FDA will meet the court-imposed deadlines to finalize the rules, or do you think we're going to have more time?
Sure. So, in terms of anything that's so questionable and so up in the air that would stop people from preparing, for the most part, no. Certainly for preventive controls, for foreign supplier verification, for sanitary transport, as Ann said, produce safety, maybe there's still a few outstanding issues to be resolved, but again, that's moving forward and not stopping. And so people should not stop preparing. If they haven't started preparing, they absolutely should start. I guess the one question in my mind is around food defense, because the approach that FDA took in that proposed rule is, it really does stray a little, as Ann mentioned, from the GFSI approach and from the approach that we more typically see in companies that have strong food defense programs. Plus, in terms of the timeline and the date for finalizing that rule, it is one of the further out in the future. So if I had to prioritize, I might put that one at the bottom of the list. Still, I think it's critically important to understand FDA's approach and proposed regulation at this point in time around food defense, but that's the only one where I would say maybe don't totally revamp your systems quite yet in the area of food defense. Preventive controls and the others, absolutely, in part because I do expect the FDA will meet the court-imposed deadlines, especially for preventive controls, and that's August of 2015. So it's not that far away. FDA gave a fairly short turnaround time on these reproposals, the supplements, December 15th, so that they can presumably get through the comments, make any changes they need to make, and get these rules final and out in August. The other rules, produce foreign supplier verification, they flow out just a couple months after that. So it's not like you have a ton more time, and I certainly would not bank on having any sort of extension or any expectation that FDA is not going to hit the deadline. They have not said anything to the contrary, and so I think that we need to proceed expecting that come August, we're going to see these final rules, and then for bigger companies, we'll have a year to be in full compliance.
Okay. We heard it here. Thank you. Everybody should now see that we are out of full screen. I'm going to spend a moment to tell you how SafetyChain can help you automate for FSMA compliance. And while I'm going through that, you can also see now on the lower right-hand side of your screen the QA tab, and you can simply enter your questions there, hit send, and then we'll get to those questions. SafetyChain has a comprehensive food safety and quality assurance automation solution that can help you be fully compliant with FSMA. One of the components is a comprehensive solution for approved vendor programs and supplier compliance, including foreign supplier verification. That includes documents, COA analysis, and supplier audits. We can help you schedule, monitor, and validate all of the plan components of your safety plans, including your GMPs and your CCPs and your preventive controls and more. We provide non-conformance alerts and CAPA generation. All of your food safety and quality information goes into a central repository of all upstream, downstream, and internal data and documents so that you're audit ready on demand. You've got the information that you need to do risk assessment, and you can do trending for continuous improvement. And we can also help you automate your GFSI programs. All of you, when you get the recording link on Monday, should also have a link to our paper, How to Automate a FSMA-Ready Food Safety Plan, and hopefully you'll all receive that. And we've got our information that we'll share in a few minutes that you can also contact us if you'd like to learn more. So with that, let's get to some of the questions that we've got from our audience. The first question we have is from Jack, and Jack is saying, can you summarize the requirements to be a qualified individual? What makes that person a qualified individual?
Sure. Well, this is Jennifer. So that's a little, I can only give a vague answer at this time. The vague answer is FDA defines it as somebody who has the education, training, and experience to make the types of decisions that need to be made here, and says that you can gain that by taking a training course that's built off of the FDA-approved curriculum that doesn't exist yet. It's not out yet. So that's part of where we have a bit of a challenge in being able to clearly define and have somebody show their card that says, I am a qualified individual. We just don't have that opportunity right now. But as you look at the types of responsibilities and the expectations of that qualified individual, you can clearly get a sense of the information that this person needs to know. They need to be competent in food safety, in a nutshell. So if you look at the proposed rule and if you look at some of the documents that we have, our FSMA key provisions around preventive controls, it discusses that role of the qualified individual a little bit more. So the fact that the curriculum isn't out yet doesn't mean that you can't look internally and intuitively tell this is the person that's going to be our qualified individual or group of people, and identify any additional training that they might need.
Great, thank you. Got a question from Susan asking, do you expect in the final rules that we'll see the same controls for domestic suppliers as we're seeing for foreign?
I'll let Val take a stab at that first, and then I can provide any commentary if she wants.
Great, thanks,
Sure,
Val.
thanks, Jennifer. The short answer to that is that the FDA has set up those programs so they align closely with one another. So for domestic supplier qualification and foreign supplier qualification, you still are going to need to have a written approval process. You're going to need to go through a hazard analysis and understand the product risks and the inherent risks to that particular product category. But the nice thing that FDA has figured out is that if you have both domestic and foreign suppliers, you don't need to have two different programs. You can utilize one program assuring that each particular subset of that program meets the requirements in order to achieve those objectives. Jennifer, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's a good summary response.
Great, thank you. Richard is asking, for the 5 rules that you feel are not changing, where can I get more information? I know that there's a lot of that on the TAG site and perhaps some other resources. Jennifer?
Well, I think here we've now got quite a bank of FSMA Fridays that address these 5 rules, the preventive controls for human and animal, produce safety, foreign supplier verification, and sanitary transport. So I think going back and looking in the archives here at SafetyChain is certainly an opportunity. We do have on the TAG, atchisongroup.com site, we've got our key provisions documents, although we have not yet updated them for the supplements, which is just a function of being super busy. But we have our blog too that summarizes the changes that we see in the supplements. And then there's www.fda.gov/FSMA, and they maintain the actual text of these proposed rules and the supplements and redline versions and frequently asked questions and everything like that. So that's a great resource to go straight to FDA.
Great, thank you. And for those of you who might be new to FSMA Friday, when you get the link to the recording of today's event, you can also access the archives, to Jennifer's point, of every FSMA Friday since the beginning of FSMA Fridays. So thank you, Jennifer, for bringing that up. Question here from Rachel. Will whole, uncut, processed fruit have to be shipped with refrigeration even though it is not now and does not need to be stored with refrigeration? Will this apply differently to wholesalers versus repackers?
That's a good question. I'll start an answer and see if Ann or Val want to chime in. But basically, the way that FDA has constructed the preventive controls rule is that these decisions are made by the qualified individual. So FDA is not, for the most part, being very prescriptive about types of products, when they need to be refrigerated, at what temperatures. The expectation is that the qualified individual knows the answers to these questions, that the qualified individual is able to evaluate the science, understand the hazards associated with these products and the level of risk if they're significant hazards, and identify the appropriate controls. So a lot is left up to that qualified individual. So FDA isn't saying that uncut fruit needs to be shipped with refrigeration. You would need to make that determination, and you would need to have the scientific justification for it. Ann, Val, anything else you would add?
Valerie, Jennifer, this is Ann. I think you did a great job answering that, and I don't have anything else to add to it. The scientific piece for sure, and definitely relying on the qualified individual's education and experience, and potentially attending that class as well to be the qualified individual is the person that will need to make that determination for the hazards that might be present in that product.
Great, thank you. I think that we covered some of this, but in case there's more to add, Monica is asking, can you explain the requirements for domestic supplier approval? From what I understand, FSMA is going to have a lot to do with that. Is there any additional information that we didn't cover before when it comes to domestic supplier approval, Jen?
Sure. If you read the supplement, it lays out how this new component of preventive controls, the supplier control, comes into play and under what circumstances. And it really is when you are relying on that supplier for the control of a significant hazard that you've identified. In terms of how you develop the approval process, FDA is not being specific. It isn't being prescriptive at all in terms of what that approval process may look like. That said, I know that there are definitely tricks of the trade that Valerie can give some insight on of what you might actually want to do, because FDA just says have an approval process, doesn't tell you exactly what that means. So Val, can you lend any insight on that?
Oh, sure. From some practical experience, what you're going to want to do is look at the risks for the product and look at the risks for the supplier environment and find a way in order to understand what the overall risk is to the brand and to the particular product that you're bringing in based upon the information collected. Some of that information can come from documentation such as surveys, audit reports, and you sending out potentially your own person into their facility to take a look at those particular gaps that are important to your brand and your brand ownership. As you know, the supplier control program it's an enormous undertaking. If I can give you any good advice today, it would be that you'll want to take a look at your highest risk or highest volume product and start from there to build your program and to evaluate it and get it qualified and get the supporting documentation to support either your rejection, your acceptance, like the approval status or conditional status, and move down the list from there. Some particular companies do not yet have a program in place. Some companies do have a program, but they're unsure if it's going to meet the expectations for FSMA. So my advice to you would be is to visit the FDA.gov site. They also have an FDA fact sheet, which likes to summarize the rule in about 5 to 7 pages. Look up the preventive controls, pay close attention to the supplier controls piece because they are rather prescriptive with the hazard analysis, and assure that you are able to undertake that and you have a qualified individual on staff that has the knowledge and expertise to effectively drive that decision-making process.
Great, thank you. We are at the bottom of the hour. We still have quite a few questions. We will stay on for a couple of extra minutes to try to get to some more of those. But if you are leaving us, thank you so much for joining us today. There's some information here. Don't miss next month's FSMA Friday because of the holiday. It's going to be on Friday, December 19th. And the team is going to be discussing what to expect from FSMA in 2015. If you'd like more information on how the Atchison Group can help you be FSMA ready, you can see their website URL here at atchisongroup.com. For more information on how SafetyChain software solutions can help you automate for FSMA, you can go to info@safetychain.com. And we always invite you to visit our website to download some informational white papers and to register for upcoming events as well as archived webinars. So we hope to see you online soon. And with that, we're just going to jump back to some of the questions. What foreign supplier verification activities does a U.S. importer of foods from Canada, and they are specifically mentioning dietary supplement components, what activities does that U.S. importer have to perform to meet the requirements of FSMA?
That's a good question because dietary supplements are called out a little bit specifically in the foreign supplier verification rule, regardless of whether they're being imported from Canada or somewhere else. I know Ann and Val both have worked in the dietary supplement world, and if either of you are willing to kind of explain what those requirements are, and it depends on whether it's an ingredient, a component, or a finished product. But Val, do you want to start, or you want to pass it over to Ann?
Jennifer, thanks. You know, I can start it off a little bit, and then I'll pitch it over to Ann to add the extra information. I know as part of the compliance requirements for a dietary supplement company that's going to be entering products into the United States, they would have to register their facility underneath the current food facility registration regulations. As far as the differences and requirements based upon if it's a dietary ingredient or component, I don't have that information readily available to me, and I'm wondering if Ann has that information to share with our audience. Ann?
Sure. The dietary supplement component piece, as long as you are following 21 CFR 10136, the good GMP practices for dietary supplements, and meeting all of the specific components required, in regard to product identity and so on and so forth, as prescribed in those CGMPs, and meeting the specification for the component piece, there are some exemptions that apply for foreign supplier verification. I encourage you to take a look at what those are, because as Jennifer mentioned, there are some exemptions that are different if it's a dietary supplement component or if it's a dietary supplement, dietary ingredient, or if it's a finished dietary supplement product category. So, I encourage you to take a look at that, but for the most part, if it's a component going into a dietary supplement and not going into a food for human consumption, there are definitely some exemptions that apply. Mostly it's because of the exemption to be able to have that dietary component be produced under the regulation of CGMPs for dietary supplements.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from Guyan. Will foreign training and experience in food safety be taken into an account when determining if somebody is a qualified individual?
FDA has said that if somebody does not take the class, which I would encourage you to just take the class once it becomes available. But if you want to say that you have other experience, acquired domestic or foreign, that should satisfy, that should kind of be able to demonstrate that you've already basically, what's in the class, FDA has said that the way that they'll evaluate that is by looking at the job that you're doing. If you've done a good hazard analysis, you have the right preventive controls in place, good, then you must be qualified. Despite your level of experience, if you don't do a good job in developing that food safety plan, FDA will deem that experience to be inadequate because at the end of the day, you didn't get the job done. So it doesn't matter whether it's foreign training or domestic training. The curriculum, once it's developed, companies and educational institutions and others will be able to take that training and develop and deliver it presumably around the world. It'll have to be delivered around the world, that type of course based on that standardized curriculum. And then presumably you'll get a certificate that's issued. So in terms of the training, it will be offered worldwide because food facilities that work with the U.S. are everywhere in the world. But you can go ahead and look at the rule at how the language that FDA uses to describe that qualified individual and figure out if you fit.
Great, thank you. Interesting question here from Ron. In trying to identify if you are a small or large company so that you can determine your grace period, is it about employee size, revenue, both? He's saying if you have under 500 employees but more than $1 million in sales, are you large?
Great question, and there is no clear answer because it depends on the rule. So there's no one size fits all, either based on employees or based on sales. It is, each rule has different definitions of that very small business and then the remainder being large businesses. So you really have to look at each rule, and I don't think at this point in time that we have a matrix together that shows the rule by rule definitions, although that's something we could put on our to-do list. It was only in these supplements the FDA made their proposed decisions around size, looking at that $1 million threshold for preventive controls for human food, but it's $2.5 million if you're in the animal food industry. If we're talking about intentional adulteration, then we're talking $10 million. So the answer is it depends.
Okay, sounds like a future FSMA Friday topic too.
Perhaps.
Yeah, question from Nora. Does each facility require a qualified individual, or can a company have one person who covers multiple plants?
Good question. The qualified individual doesn't even have to work for your company. You can outsource that qualified individual. They don't have to be a full-time employee of yours. They don't have to be any employee of yours. But it's a qualified individual who needs to perform these specified functions. So however you figure out a way that you can do it, that'll work. As we look at what that qualified individual needs to do, there are some types of situations, manufacturing in particular, where I think in terms of workload, it would be very difficult for one person to cover multiple plants, and I also think it could be impractical to try to outsource that role of the qualified individual. But that's a business decision for each company to make and each facility to make. So, Ann, Val, do you see it any differently?
I agree, Jennifer. I completely agree, Jennifer.
Great, thank you. Margaret's asking, how are companies going to be informed of what's coming? So many manufacturers, importers, et cetera, are still not aware of the details. So I'll first chip in by saying keep coming to FSMA Fridays, but above that, Jennifer, any advice?
Oh, you know, that is something that is just a constant struggle, I think. FDA is aware of it. They've been trying to partner with foreign governments, with trade associations, really trying to spread the word. I think that a great step perhaps would be for everybody who's on this call who has suppliers who are going to be impacted, who has customers that are going to be impacted, you try to make sure that they're aware of what's coming. And let's try to spread the word kind of in a grassroots fashion. But that is a major, major challenge. There are people who are in the know, and they're in the know. Other people who just have no clue that these rules are even out there and being proposed.
Great, thank you. And from Guyan, will FDA review and approve the design of the preventive control before implementing?
Ann, why don't you take that one?
Sure. I would answer that with no. They're not going to approve and design your particular facility's preventive controls prior to implementing. It's written that's your responsibility. That's why I think one of the reasons they've put the thought process behind the training that's being developed for the qualified individual, and they do require that person to have education, experience, and training because they want you to own that food safety. They're not going to be able to come in and do a quick review of all of your documents because, number one, that won't be quick. And number two, there's too many facilities for FDA to go in and verify that you've got, number one, the right preventive controls in place, and number two, they're valid and effective to mitigate the risks in your particular processing facility. So in short, no, but they're built the rule or proposed the rule in such a way that number one, facilities own it. Number two, you've got somebody there who can help build that program and continue to make sure that that program is working effectively in the qualified individual. Anything else to add, Jennifer or Valerie?
I'm good.
Great. I think that was our last question. So with that, everybody, thank you so much as always. Valerie and Ann and Jennifer, thank you so much for your insight and input today. And everybody have a fabulous Thanksgiving, and we'll see you hopefully on December 19th for what to expect from FSMA in 2015.